Hi, everybody. I see the TikTok Shives in the chat, and I know it's time to start the show. Um, Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. Glad you could make it. Happy Friday. Happy 4th of July yesterday to those of you who celebrated, and congratulations to all of you in the UK for getting a at least a better election result. I know not everybody is thrilled with the Labor Party, and there's lots of things about the Labor Party that people shouldn't be thrilled with, much like our own equivalent here in the United States, the Democrats. But hopefully, it's going to be better than the Tories being in charge, right? So fingers crossed. Hoping for good things and hoping for the equivalent of something like that in this country in a few months. But anyway, as usual, I will be answering questions submitted ahead of time by my wonderful Patreon patrons and channel members. So if you have something for me in the live chat, if you have a question for me or something you just want to have me talk about, or if you were especially going to be generous and throw in a super chat or anything like that, if at all possible, please hold on to that stuff until I get through the patron and member questions, because while I'm answering those, I'm not paying attention to the live chat and I might miss whatever you have to say or whatever you have to offer me. So, all that being said, let's turn now to the patron and member questions and see what we've got. The first one is from our old friend John Burns, who says, "You had an interesting video about the debate and switch last week. I guess you forgot what happened in 1984. There were claims that the president was much too old and signs that he was going to lose. What happened was Ronald Reagan played this up early in the election, but later won the debate and switches, leading to his dominating performance of winning 49 states during the election, confirming Reagan as the greatest communicator of all time." So that's all that needs to happen. Biden to pull the old rope-a-dope a la Ali on Trump and win the debate and switches, showing all that it was a ruse. So do you have faith in the old guy, or does everyone have to vote for a blathering moron? Time, I guess, will tell. I'm sure, though, there will be many feeling secure that they're in a bona fide blue state will choose who they want to vote for. Okay, so I would love to think that Biden's poor debate performance was part of some grand strategy to lure Trump out. And then, when he least suspects it, bam, Biden just hits him and knocks him out. I don't think that's the case. I am willing to accept that Biden's poor debate performance was just that, a really bad night. And while it may have amplified some of his ongoing issues in terms of his speaking ability and his stamina and those sorts of things, that those issues are not serious enough to disqualify him from the office or to make him such a liability to the ticket that he can't possibly win the election in November. But I don't think it's reasonable to assume like, oh, he's just rope-a-doping. I don't think that's it. That would be great, but I don't think that's it. But I still think the only reasonable, responsible thing to do for people who are eligible to vote in our election in November is to vote for Joe Biden for president. So that's what I hope people do, whether they live in a bona fide blue state or not. I am usually not very receptive to that argument. I am particularly not receptive to that argument this time, where at least, I mean, it's still, again, it's only July. We haven't even gotten to the conventions yet. We've only had one debate. Usually at this point, we haven't had any debates. So we still have a good way to go before the election, and a lot can happen. But the early indicators are that this will probably be a close election. And it will be close, perhaps, judging by just the way things lay now, in some states where it might ordinarily not be so close. So the whole, I live in a safe blue state, so I can afford to throw my vote away in order to soothe my personal conscience. again, I have, just as you can probably tell by the way I phrased that just now, I have a very limited amount of respect for that point of view to begin with. I find it selfish and irresponsible, um, and self-centered, and all kinds of things that I just wish people would not be when it comes to voting and choosing our leaders and our representatives. But this time especially, it's like, no, you need to vote. You need to use the power of your vote. You need to use your share in our national voice that chooses our representatives and chooses our government. You need to use that power that you have been given as a citizen to make sure that Donald Trump does not become president. And the best way to do that, the surest way to do that, is to vote for Joe Biden. And you know what? If that doesn't soothe your conscience, I don't know what to tell you. But anyway, no, I don't think Biden is rope-a-doping Trump. That would be nice, but I don't think so. Larry Bliss, who is old enough to remember when the Supreme Court was liberal. That's pretty old, Larry. Who is the most appealing Star Trek animal character? Is it a Tribble, Porthos, Spot, the tardigrade, or my favorite, Grudge? I know you love dogs, so feel free to also name a runner-up. I mean, a Tribble, like, you know, I don't know. I mean, like, the thing I like about Spot is that he's literally just a cat. Like, there's nothing remarkable about Spot at all. He's just Data's cat. He's just a cat. The tardigrade is a really neat idea, but is fairly nondescript as a character. It's more important for what the tardigrade represents in the story and sort of the decisions it forces upon the proper characters in those episodes. I like Porthos. Porthos is great. Porthos is an adorable little dog, but I feel like it's between the cats. It's either Spot or Grudge. And what I love about Spot is that Spot is just a completely ordinary cat. What I love about Grudge is that she's also a completely ordinary cat who is fucking huge. It was just a huge cat. And seems to have, like, they managed to impart a little bit more personality to Grudge than Spot ever really gets. Like, Grudge feels more like an individual. So I'll go for Grudge. I'll pick Grudge as the most appealing Star Trek animal, and I'll give Spot the runner-up place. David Colby, currently trapped on Mist Island again. I asked my girlfriend what question I should ask you, and she said, "How do you like Strange New Worlds so much with boxing gloves on?" While you ponder that, you know what I want to know? How do you stand to draw breath in that benighted state of Maryland, knowing that every second you live under a flag without a single bear on it? My flag has a bear, Steve, a bear. For your sake, I am not going to tell our flag that you said that shit. Because if I did, you would never be safe in the state of Maryland. If you wanted to come to the state of Maryland for some reason to sample our delicious crabs, for example, to sample our delicious state cuisine, the crab, sprinkled with Old Bay. Or if you wanted to see the Old Bay itself, the Chesapeake Bay, and visit our beautiful National Aquarium, assuming you could afford the entrance fee. If you wanted to do any of those things, perhaps take in a baseball game at beautiful Camden Yards and watch the Baltimore Orioles play a baseball game. If you wanted to come to Maryland for any reason, you would not be safe within its borders if the Maryland flag knew that shit you just said. Comparing the Maryland flag disparagingly to the flag of the state of California. Ooh, there's a bear on it. Oh, our flag has a bear. How do I like Strange New Worlds so much with boxing gloves on? I use my feet. The always tired communist that also liberals online. Some random geek. What are luxuries in life? Never mind, that isn't the question. Do you think that the internet should be considered a luxury? because a liberal I have conversations with consider the internet to be a luxury, as in you don't need it to live. I argue that the internet is a basic necessity like shelter, food, water, healthcare, electricity, and access to transportation. To apply for a job, you apply online. The only way that Joanna Roberts, Phoenix, Linequin, Naz, and Joey can receive donations from around the world is because of the internet. I did my whole jury duty thing on the internet. Why do some liberals think that the internet isn't a basic necessity? Sorry, second question with a one question limit. Like, if you don't work a regular job and you are quote unquote able bodied, you should be punished for that life choice and those no luxuries like the internet. Now, for something completely different, here is a meme, and there's a link to the meme in the question, but I went ahead and put the meme in the in the old XSplit broadcaster. So here is the meme that our friend Some Random Geek shared. It's Skeletor, and he's saying, "Good afternoon. I'm collecting used dildos and vibrators to donate to all the bitches that need to go fuck themselves." And you can see that the box Skeletor is holding says, "Toys for Twats," which I think is a very clever pun. So thank you for sharing that, Some Random Geek. As to your question, I know that the internet should not be considered a luxury. 30 years ago? Sure. 30 years ago, when the internet was a less centrally embedded part of our civilization, sure, 30 years ago, you could say the internet was a luxury. Now, absolutely not. For the reasons that you just mentioned, there are so many things that are done on the internet that are either way, way, way easier to do on the internet or are virtually impossible to do not on the internet, that it should be considered a public utility. It should be considered no different than having a phone or a radio or a television, and those should not be luxuries either. Those are it's having the ability to be connected to the outside world, having the ability to participate in your society and your culture, right? Either by receiving information or by sending information out, and ideally being able to do both. So no, the internet is not a luxury, not anymore, and it hasn't been for a very long time. A very long time. Tofu Dunk, how much are you enjoying Star Trek Prodigy? And without spoilers, do you feel certain characters from a certain series are redeemed because of this show? Well, I did a review video about it a couple days ago, so if you want to hear my thoughts sort of in more at greater length, watch that. But the short version is, I thought the second season of Prodigy was splendid. I thought it was fantastic. I really liked it a lot. I liked it just as much, if not more, than I liked the first season, and I liked the first season a hell of a lot too. So yeah, I thought it was great. As for certain character here, I generally speaking, I like the way Prodigy handles characters that originated in other shows, legacy characters, and so forth. I think it handles them very well. I actually finished writing a video today that I'm going to shoot tomorrow and aim to have up next week that talks about that for about maybe a little more than half the video. The idea that one of the things that Prodigy does, that it does better than pretty much any Star Trek show currently in production, and better than most shows, whatever series or franchise they belong to, that use legacy characters from previous stuff, better than, but almost anybody does it, is using those characters in a way that feels meaningful and doesn't just feel like you're tossing out a cameo to pop the marks. Like, oh, look who it is. Like when Prodigy uses an established character from another show, it doesn't feel that way. So I think they're, I as I said in the video I put up earlier this week, if you insist on doing that, which I still think is done way too much, and just it's the sort of thing that should not be done, and should be largely avoided, if not completely avoided, when a new show is being made in a pre-existing franchise like Star Trek. But if you insist on doing it, Prodigy has shown the way to do it. The only problem I have with your question is the word redeemed. It's not the job of a showrunner to redeem somebody else's show. And if certain characters from a certain show that was made 25, 30 years ago were bad characters in that show, or were not used up to their potential, in that show, the fact that they are used in a much better and more satisfying way in a new show, to me, has no effect on that old show at all. Like, it doesn't make the old show any better just because someone wrote a better show with some of those characters 30 years later. I don't view it that way at all. And I don't think that that is the responsibility of someone making it. Like, if I'm given, you know, the job to make a new project, let's say Star Wars instead of Star Trek. Let's say I'm making Star Wars and they say, "Hey, you're going to do a new Star Wars show and it's going to take place, you know, I don't know, it's going to take place sometime between episode 3 and episode 4, right? Which is a fairly popular time period for more recent Star Wars stuff to take place. What are you going to do to redeem the prequels? Nothing. Nothing. It's not my job." Right? You know, or, oh, you're going to do a show that features characters from, you're going to do a Star Trek show that's set, you know, 20 years after the end of Star Trek Enterprise. What are you going to do to redeem Enterprise? Nothing. That's not my job. That show exists as it is. That's not my job to redeem somebody else's show. It's my job to do my show. And that's mostly what there are some things about the way Prodigy is written that sometimes it feels like the writers have kind of taken it upon themselves, not so much to redeem stuff from older shows, but to do things that have been done in other Star Trek shows, but to do them better. And to sort of show up the old, you know, to say, okay, yeah, they tried to do this in this other show and it didn't really work. They didn't quite pull it off, but watch this. We're going to do something very similar and we are going to pull it off. They've done that a couple of times. And I'm not sure if that was their willful intention or if it's just the result of the stories they chose to tell and the established elements from older Star Trek projects that they chose to acknowledge and import into their show or what. But there have been a few times where I've thought, are they trying to show up like the other shows by saying, no, we're going to do this and we're going to show you how it's done. But it's once again, fantastic show. I hope they get a third season. Thinking Cat, how believable is the 2025 Heritage Foundation plan? As I looked back to videos of 2016 and Trump's big promises about infrastructure revenge against the libs, total bans forever on Muslims, Obamacare replacement, war with Iran, and most bizarre, making America like it was in the 1950s again. Really, I find the first 100 days said the most about the whole Trump 4 years, as he spent weeks arguing about his crowd numbers, and by the time he reached the 100th day, his only accomplishment was not signing the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which had no benefit to America at all. Really, I only think is all the government, the army and security services, police and civil services are going to blindly follow Trump, ignoring the law for this bronzed old fool. Maybe people should be laughing at this plan. I would not want to take that for granted. Just because Trump and his administration proved themselves to be fairly incompetent the first time around, I don't think that means we can afford to say, well, even if they do get elected this time, they'll probably just fuck everything up again anyway, and then there's nothing to worry about. I don't want to take that chance. I don't think you should want to take that chance. I don't think any American should want to take that chance. The prospect of Donald Trump becoming president again should send a chill down everybody's spine. And we should not count on, well, if he gets elected, he won't be able to do anything anyway because he's a fuck up and he doesn't know what he's doing. It's better to take it seriously, to convince other people who are going to vote to take it seriously, and to vote accordingly to make sure that it doesn't happen, to make sure that Trump does not win and we don't have to worry about Project 2025 in the first place. That is a much healthier attitude, I believe. Brian McKinley, slowly watching the fire begin to consume our democracy. I'm sensing a theme. Greetings and salutations. Steve, I planned on asking you a fun, pithy question about Star Trek, but then the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity made my head explode. Since then, there's been a bunch of talk about what Biden could theoretically do with this new power if he wasn't such a decent and honorable man. My question is, do you think he should go ahead and take some extraordinary steps to save democracy in America as we know it? I usually advocate for taking the moral high ground, but with so much at stake, I think I'd honestly be okay with Biden just taking out MAGA leaders like Michael Corleone at the end of The Godfather. Well, I mean, here's my problem with that. The Supreme Court ruling protects the president from prosecution based on things he does in an official capacity while in office. And that does confer an unprecedented and extremely alarming level of authority and protection from the law on the president. And I think it's a horrible decision. The sooner it gets reversed, the better, although that will probably not be for a while. But it's a monumentally awful, disastrous decision. But it doesn't actually bestow upon the president any powers that the president didn't already have. All it does is say if the president uses their official powers to do something that would otherwise be illegal, the president can't be prosecuted for it after leaving office. So, sure, I mean, the example everybody says is, Joe Biden could order SEAL Team 6 to take out Trump, Yeah, I guess he could give the order, but the president doesn't have the authority to order the military to assassinate an American. Like the military is not to be used on American citizens. That authority does not exist. So in order for Joe Biden to do that, he would have to exceed his presidential authority, and then SEAL Team 6 would have to follow the order. And while it might not be possible to prosecute Joe Biden for giving that order because of this bullshit immunity thing that the Supreme Court just made up, it would still be possible to prosecute the members of SEAL Team 6 who illegally did it. Now, you could say, well, I mean, President Biden could pardon them. Okay, but what if he didn't? You know what I mean? I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying we shouldn't be worried about it. I'm certainly not saying that if Trump were put back in office that he would not at least try to do it. But remember, it may be illegal and it may be outside the powers of the president to order a military team to assassinate an American citizen on American soil. The president could do that and not get in trouble for doing it, because he could say, well, it was an official act and I'm protected from that. But if the person he ordered to do it actually did it, they would still be in a lot of trouble. Possibly, again, unless the president just pardoned them or something. So it's, I don't think it's necessarily a practical or that good of an idea for us to say, well, Biden should just deploy and also deploying the military against American citizens. I mean, outside of like something unprecedented or that has only a single precedent, let's say, in American history, like the Civil War, that just seems like a bad idea. So let's not do that. And let's not hope that the president does that. Brian Baker, Steve, SCOTUS caused a ruckus. The debate went badly for Democrats and life is getting more complicated by the minute. Of all the questions I could ask this time around, mine is this. Do you think that Strange New Worlds is going to be the first new Trek to break 7 seasons? If I had to guess, I would say that going forward, 5 seasons is probably going to be the new 7. I'm not saying it's impossible that Strange New Worlds couldn't get 7 seasons. I'm not saying that as long as the show continues to be as good as it has been these first 2 seasons, that I wouldn't be thrilled to get 7 seasons of the show. That would be terrific. But I mean, just there are certain realities to streaming television, in this streaming era of television, and getting that many seasons is really tough. There have been streaming shows that have gotten 5 and 6 and 7 seasons, but very rarely. And those are some of the most successful shows like that have ever been produced for streaming. Like it's not a very common thing. And I mean, Strange New Worlds has from what we can tell, because it's difficult to determine the actual popularity of streaming shows, because streaming services keep their numbers pretty close to the chest most of the time. But from what we can tell, Strange New World seems to be relatively popular. It seems to be among the most popular, if not the most popular, of the new Star Trek shows. It's cracked the Nielsen streaming top 10 once or twice, I think. And I think the only other Star Trek show to do that was Picard in its third season, which I think it did once, maybe twice. So, among the current Star Trek shows that have been produced for streaming for Paramount Plus, Strange New World seems pretty popular, but popular enough and profitable enough to the studio that they would consider financing it for 7 seasons, even 10 episode seasons, instead of the old way of doing it, 7 seasons of 25 episodes apiece. I don't know. That's a tall order. I would love to see it if the show continues to be of high quality, but I wouldn't want to bet on it. I would say, unless it completely tanks in season 4, I would not be surprised to see it get a season 5. Because season 3 is about to come out next year. They've already been renewed for season 4. So once season 4 is released, unless that is just a complete disaster, I wouldn't be surprised to see season 5. But beyond that, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Stephen G. Clenard. Hey, Steve, there's a credible rumor going around. Wink. That Donna Matthews and Teenage Fan Club's power pop cover of the New York Dolls' classic Personality Crisis will be the theme song of Star Trek Legacy. I vehemently disapprove. The superfans demanding Star Trek Legacy deserve nothing less than a Donna Matthews and Teenage Fan Club power pop cover of the classic Jerry Goldsmith Star Trek The Motion Picture / TNG theme. Anyhow, what's your favorite movie featuring Donna Matthews and Teenage Fan Club's power pop cover of the New York Dolls' classic Personality Crisis? Mine is Velvet Goldmine. Fight me on this. Hashtag I gots the mot. Thomas Edison's Frankenstein. Agent Meister, The Eye of the Tiger. Grr. Peldor Joy. Steve, Star Trek V is oft maligned, and I can see why, but it's always been one of my favorite Trek movies for the following reasons. 1, it's the first Star Trek movie I saw start to finish. 2, the score is my favorite of all the Trek movies, especially the Klingon theme and the piece played over Kirk climbing the mountain during the opening. 3, every scene with Lawrence Luckinbill. 4, the scenes with Kirk, Spock, and Bones at the campfire, and later at the end in the Enterprise A's version of 10 Forward. 5, small moments of humor like Kirk asking Spock if he's one with the horse in response to Spock's suggestion that Kirk be one with the rock. 6, what does God need with a starship? 7, McCoy's flashback to the death of his father. 8, Kirk's statement that he's afraid of nothing. Sadly, Star Trek V's whole is not greater than the sum of its parts, but it's always been special to me for the reasons above and more. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and mayhap I'll do one of these for Nemesis anon. I have a soft spot for Star Trek V. I like you. I can't honestly say that I think it's a good movie. It's a very bad movie in a lot of ways, but it does have those moments, mostly character beats, that work really well. And you kind of hint at it in a couple of your items of things that you like about it. But what I really like about it is it creates what feels like a genuine sense of camaraderie among the Enterprise crew that you don't really get in any of the other films. I mean, there's camaraderie between certain, like you get that Kirk and Spock and McCoy care about each other. That's clear in all of the movies, and it's especially clear in Star Trek 2 and Star Trek 3. Star Trek 4, there's some really good Kirk and Spock stuff, and they break up into little teams, and you can tell, I mean, they get along with each other and they care about each other, right? But there's just a feeling of just casual, like, camaraderie and friendship, and it's like, oh, these guys have served together for a long time at this point. They're on their second Enterprise, and they're comfortable with each other, and they trust and respect each other. And, and that comes into play in the story at a certain point because Cybok seduces most of the crew over to his side and they kind of turn against Captain Kirk. So the camaraderie and the fellowship established among the core group is important to the story because you want to establish that, and then you break it, you contrast it with what happens later on. And the movie doesn't completely succeed at that, but the effort is there, and you can tell that that's what they were trying to do. So it's important for what's going on in that movie, as well as just a nice, there's a bit where when they're first called back to the ship at the beginning of the movie, and Kirk is on the bridge, and I think they've just gotten their orders from Admiral Harve Bennett, and Kirk has ordered them to set course for Nimbus 3, and he puts his hand on Chekhov's shoulder. It's just kind of a friendly sort of, here we go, and it just a nice gesture of friendliness, and it just feels so real and so genuine. And the extraordinary thing about that, of course, is that Walter Koenig hated William Shatner, and William Shatner barely knew who Walter Koenig was, even after having worked with him since the late 1960s. So it's acting, like they're acting, and they make it feel genuine and real. And I've always loved that moment, and I've loved that overall vibe between the main ensemble in Star Trek V. So yes, there are bits of it that I really like and really appreciate, and I have a big soft spot for it, even though it is really not a good movie. General Contact Unit Problem Child. Serious question. You really think replacing Biden at this point would be a good idea? Because I think it'd be a terrible idea, even though a lot of people are pushing for it. Like, even if it was Harris, you're asking people to get on board with a totally new person who doesn't have much public profile. The other day, I talked about the general indicators someone will win the presidency, and several of them relate to incumbency, and you'd be throwing that away entirely. Less serious question. Suppose you had to recast Forbidden Planet, but you can only... Suppose you had to recast Forbidden Planet, and you can only use actors who acted in either Star Trek, Star Wars, the Dark Knight trilogy, Doctor Who, or the cult 1977 movie Dark Star. Please make sure the ages of the actors is appropriate for the parts you pick for them, me, and the rest of the chat, I assume on their behalf. I will wait while you browse Wikipedia to get the actors' ages right. Oh, P.S. Sorry for pestering you and Dana about my review series idea, but I still think it's a good idea. Oh, you don't have to apologize. I thought it was a good idea too. And that's really funny. Your less serious question. Well done. Nicely. That is really funny. As to your serious question, I don't necessarily think it would be a good idea. I don't think I said that it would be a good idea to replace him. I said that there were times when I was watching that debate where I sort of fantasized about, like, what would Kamala Harris have to say in this situation? Would she have done a better job of just absolutely, walloping Trump on some of the shit he said and challenging his blatant lies in ways that Biden was unable to do effectively? But first of all, it seems like Biden's not going anywhere. I mean, he doubled down on that today in Wisconsin. He made it very clear, I'm not going anywhere. So Biden's the guy. So since Biden's the guy we need to elect. It's as simple as that. What I said in my video was, whether Biden ends up being the guy or not, if they do make a change, if they do say, okay, Biden's out, Vice President Harris is in, if that happens, then that needs to happen soon. And then we all need to focus and get behind her or whoever the new candidate is and say, all right, now this is the person and we're going to elect them. But it looks like it's going to be Biden. So we need to elect Biden. And I agree with you. There are a lot of factors in Biden's favor that are not just erased by a bad debate. And in fact, again, you have to take polling with a grain of salt. It's not always accurate, but it is the best indicator that we have of things like this. And the polling since the bad debate indicates that Biden was hurt by it, but was not hurt by it any worse than previous presidential candidates have been hurt by poor debate performances. It has not been catastrophic. It's not like, oh shit, there's no way he can possibly win now. It didn't help, but it's not the kind of thing where we have to go like, oh shit, what are we going to do now? You know? So if Biden's staying in, and it seems like he is, then all right, let's get to work. Wolfie Basach, it's bedtime. My subconscious. Right, I'm taking orders for tonight's stream. What do you fancy? Me, Rebecca Ferguson, please, and something lacy. Subconscious. Nah, she's too good for you. How about the woman who cleans the pub toilet? Me, too good? It's a fucking dream, for Christ's sake. Come on, give me Fergie. Subconscious. Careful. Remember last year? Desert Island. Marjorie Taylor Greene. Me. Jesus, that was you? I thought it was the out-of-date pork and gherkin roll I had for tea that night. Subconscious. Nah, that just gave you the squirts for 8 hours. The dream was mine. Anyway, you'll be asleep in 10 seconds. You're down for Big Marge at 2 a.m. Me. No! Subconscious. No, Marge the bog cleaner with rubber gloves and lace trimming. Me. Okay, done. Night-night. So my question is, have you ever tried to influence dreams, either by mnemonic induction, wake initiation, or maybe just chowing down on stupid shit you should have binned 4 days ago? Every once in a while, like occasionally, I've tried to do the thing where, like, you know, you try to hold a thought in your head as you fall asleep with the idea that, oh, you know, then that'll be what you dream about. But never with too much success. And I mean, throughout my life, my dreams have been mostly pretty random. And also, most of the time, like most mornings when I wake up, I have no memory of my dreams. I remember some dreams, but that's the exception rather than the norm. So no, I've never felt particularly motivated to try and influence my dreams to do, you know, lucid dreaming or directed dreaming or anything like that. But by the way, this part here that you wrote, really funny. Joe McClory, I worked all day July 4th this year. I don't know how much working in a place with people sad about not being free to spend Independence Day with the people they love impacted my reflections on the 4th. But, well, I have never been more afraid for the liberty of people. The recent Supreme Court choice, Project 2025, just everything. It kills me because I know if I keep quiet, I will be safe if changed from when the freedoms start falling away. And I don't know if I will have the courage to fight back when doing so is dangerous. I'm worried that our Night of Long Knives will be an official action. And even if Trump is beaten back, it will only be a matter of time. How are you dealing with this? Because I am not handling it productively. Well, I'm dealing with it in a couple of different ways. I'm reminding myself that it's not over. It's not even close to being over. Some people, including people on our side, are being really fatalistic about this and saying, and basically acting like Trump being elected is a foregone conclusion. That's nonsense. That's ridiculous. It's July. I said this earlier. It's July. We haven't had any conventions yet. We've had one debate. The election's not until November. All right. It's way too early to be like, well, that's over with. Trump's going to win. Let's forget it. Just forget it. Right. So that's the first most important thing. Don't give up hope, because there is not a remotely rational reason to give up hope yet. We have plenty of time to work and to push and to win this election. And I think that's what we're going to do. And if we don't, at least we'll have given it our fucking best shot. And the other thing that I cling to is if the worst case scenario does happen and Trump gets reelected and he implements a lot of the things that we are afraid that he will implement, even that disaster, and it would be a disaster and it would be a horror and it would be something that, you know, we should keep in mind right now and work very hard to prevent from happening. But if that happens, it will not be permanent and it will be survivable. That doesn't mean all of us will survive. That doesn't mean it will be reversed soon. It may take years. It may take longer. But it is not permanent. It's not as though all will be lost forever. It will make life a lot worse. It will make things a lot more difficult. It will make living a lot more dangerous. and a lot less satisfying and a lot less comfortable for quite a few of us. And it will be morally and emotionally discouraging to all of us who care about things like freedom and democracy. But it will not be permanent. It will not last forever. If it can be done, it can be undone. At great effort and probably at great cost, but it can be undone. So I cling to those hopes. They're not necessarily, they don't necessarily make you want to go out and throw a party, but I think those are level-headed, reasonable things to believe and to think of. And they are two of the things that keep me going in the face of the effort that will be required between now and November to get the right outcome, and the work that will be demanded if we fail and we get the wrong outcome. M.W. Ridra, hey Steve, I hope your 4th of July was bearable. I'm not a fan of the holiday, honestly. It did make me think of a question, though. A recent YouTube video I watched, We Needed My Adventures with Superman by Troyo Boyo 17, made the assertion that My Adventures with Superman is the antithesis of the borderline jingoistic Reagan-era Superman that John Byrne gave us. What do you think of that take? What did you think of John Byrne's Truth, Justice, and the American Way version of Supes versus Other Incarnations? Well, visually, I thought it was great. I think John Byrne is a really terrific artist, and I thought his rendering of Superman visually was wonderful. As a storyteller, as a writer, it's never been, I mean, it's not like at the bottom of the pile for me by any means, but it's never been my favorite. It's not one that I find myself drawn back to very often. I don't really feel like I need to go read those John Byrne Superman comics from the post-crisis era. It's just, it's never been my favorite. Even though I do think there's some good stuff in there, but yeah, I mean, it was the Reagan era. I think part of what Byrne was trying to do was bring back the 1950s Superman, the Truth, Justice, and the American Way Superman. And, that has never been the most appealing variation or interpretation of the character to me. I don't think Superman should be portrayed as belonging to the United States or representing specifically the American way, even the idealized version of the American way. I think it's much better for him as a character and for him as a symbol to us, the audience, to see him as a representative of all of humanity and of the role model for all of us of what we can and should do, minus the superpowers, in our everyday lives, like the kind of person we should strive to be: honest and fair and principled and kind and, willing to stand up for people who need stood up for, and willing to speak out against injustice, and willing to work hard in the cause of justice. I mean, things like that should be universal human values that are certainly not uniquely American values. So I've never been a big fan. I prefer the version of that, the original version of that phrase. It became Truth, Justice, and the American Way on the George Reeves show, which I love. I love the George Reeves Superman. But one of the dubious contributions that the George Reeves Superman made to the tradition of the character was it turned the phrase into he fights a never-ending battle for truth, justice, and the American way. And that might have sounded good during the era of anti-communism and, that sort of thing, when there was like the Red Scare going on and Superman's our hero. He fights for the American way, for democracy. See, right? Might have sounded good back then. But I think it's better put in the Fleischer cartoons from 10 years before that. He fights a never-ending battle for truth and justice. That's what Superman should represent to me. Not truth, justice, and the American way. That's too limiting. That's too reductive. Truth and justice. There you go. What higher values could you fight for? So yeah, and I do think, My Adventures with Superman definitely does not have the jingoistic element. He does feel like a much more optimistic and idealistic and universal version of the character, even though the show mostly takes place in Metropolis, which, by the way, I love. You know, I tend to think most Superman stories should take place in Metropolis. I view him as I'm more interested in him when he's in Metropolis as opposed to flying to other planets or doing shit around the world. I like the stories being centered on Metropolis, but he's the hero of the world, not just the hero of the United States. And certainly he should not be the symbol of the United States exclusively. He should be a symbol of hope and of admiration and, goodness for the entire world. Cara Hughes, hi Steve, hope you're well. Things are a little crazy here in the UK. Huge general election, although the result was pretty much a foregone conclusion. Anyway, I know that there are a lot of new Star Trek series coming out soon. Do you think we could get oversaturated with Star Trek? I know that it's a huge cash cow for Paramount, but do you think it might be time to just give all of Star Trek a rest? I think this tendency to circle back to old series like TOS, TNG, Voyager, and DS9 is harming new content being produced, but this is only my opinion. Would like to hear your thoughts. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of validity in what you're saying, and I do think it is possible, certainly as the MCU has demonstrated, and as to a lesser extent Star Wars has demonstrated in recent years, it is possible to burn out the audience. Like people are... It's not so much that the more recent MCU movies have been bad. Most of them have them, and some of them actually, I think, have been very good. Not as good as like the best of the entire series. But I mean, the Marvels is a perfectly fine, perfectly enjoyable superhero movie. Like there's not a thing wrong with it. There's no reason why a person should go see the Marvels and leave the theater or turn off their TV feeling disappointed. But a lot of people were just not that interested in it. Just because there's just so much. There's just so much, There's so much superhero stuff and there's so much Marvel stuff that people are just kind of burned out. And yes, the same thing could happen to Star Trek, and maybe for some fans it already has. It hasn't happened with me yet because I think Paramount has been very smart with the way they are releasing the current shows. You never had more than one show releasing new episodes at once. And in the last couple of years, they've even been really smart about putting in little gaps between shows. When Discovery was releasing its fourth season, they released the first half of the season, and then Discovery took a break and they released a bunch of Prodigy episodes for like a month or 2 months or something. And then Disco came back and finished out its season. And that was all like a continuous release schedule. Like there were no weeks off. It was just new Star Trek every week for however many weeks that was. And that was a little exhausting, but it was different shows. It was Discovery and then some Prodigy and then some more Discovery. And in more recent years, what they've done is a Star Trek show they'll release one season of one show, and then after its 10 or 13 episodes have been released over 10 or 13 weeks, then there'll be a little bit of a break. There'll be a couple of weeks where nothing new comes out, or maybe a couple of months, depending on what they have ready to go. And then you'll get the new season of Lower Decks or the new season of Picard when it was coming out or whatever. So that you don't feel like you're just being inundated by it. I do think you need to take a break. There's an old saying that how can they miss you if you won't go away? And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. You don't want to build in such a long gap that the audience just loses interest and doesn't care. And they're like, well, it's whatever. They probably canceled it, right? You don't want it to have that effect, but you gotta leave them wanting more for long enough that when the show does come back or another show comes on or whatever, they're eager for it. They're ready for it. Like, oh, new Star Trek. Awesome. Let's watch. I think that's important. And I don't think that Star Trek is in the oversaturation zone at this point. And as long as they keep dealing out the new stuff at a reasonable schedule and not just overwhelming people with it, I think they'll be okay. Like right now we're in, there was a gap of several months between the end of Discovery and season 2 of Prodigy dropping on Netflix earlier this week. And I don't think they've announced an official release date for the last season of Lower Decks, but it's coming out sometime later this year, probably in the fall, I would guess. And then the third season of Strange New Worlds will be sometime, people are speculating, early next year. So hopefully that'll be a little gap between the end of Lower Decks and then the premiere of the new season of Strange New Worlds. So you need to give people a breather. You can't just be like, hey, you want Star Trek? Here, have some Star Trek. Here's some more Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek, constantly. That'll burn people out. You need to give them a breather. And I think as long as they do that, and as long as the shows themselves are good and people want to actually watch them, I think they'll be okay. But it is something you need to worry about and be aware of. Air One Fire, the man who says you betrayed your uniform. That's you? Hi, Steve. Now that after the recent Supreme Court decisions, America is gone. Yeah, we had a good run. Well, I would like to offer my condolences to all Americans. You used to have an okay country. At the same time, congratulations to the UK. What a great result. Now, I thought the criminal said he would have the US leave NATO when he wins the election, but apparently your Congress said he can't do that. So that means starting next year, we'll be in an alliance with a fascist, authoritarian Russian bitch. My question is, what do you think this will mean for the rest of the democratic world? Do you think American fascism will sort of inspire Europe to find its identity as a bastion of democracy in opposition to the US? Or do you think the fascist victory in America will inspire all the other fascists in the rest of the Western world, and that'll be the end of Western democracy for the foreseeable future? Best wishes. I mean, look, I have no expertise to call upon to make any sort of prediction. I certainly hope that if Trump does win our election, which, as I said in a previous question, that is by no means a foregone conclusion, and we should not be acting like, well, anyway, after Trump wins. Like, no. That's fatalistic. That's self-defeating. Do not do that. But on the assumption that that's what happens, I certainly hope that the democratic forces in Europe will be emboldened not just by that, but by the landslide Labour victory in the UK general election yesterday, and by various other factors to rise up. And yes, I'm sure the fascist elements will be energized and will try to expand their authority, but hopefully the democratic forces will be just as, if not more, energized to beat them back into the shadows. And I really hope that's what happens. I hope that's what happens, no matter who wins our election. I hope that's what happens. I hope that the rising tide of fascism is pushed back. Yeah, but I don't know, but I sure hope so. Shazy, good evening, Steve. I would like to start becoming more involved in my union and the labor movement in general. We have a lot of work to do, preventing outsourcing and bringing back in-house talent, securing wages that at least keep up with inflation, and recently solidifying work-from-home protections into our collective agreements. I've been reading on the labor successes that Australia's public service unions have had and hope to one day put it into practice in my own country. As an advocate, how would you go into building a strong, adaptable, and resilient union? Do you think that unions should strictly focus on workplace-related issues, or should they also support social justice causes worldwide? Cheers. Well, I mean, the thing is, if you want to support workplace-related issues, I don't think a union can pretend that social justice causes don't exist. The social justice causes are workplace causes. I mean, equality under the law and fair treatment for queer people is a social justice cause and is something that we should care about and be pushing in favor of just in society in general. But that is also something where a labor union can play a role, because you're going to part of the labor force that you are representing in your union most likely will be people who identify as one flavor or another of queer. You'll have gay people or trans people or people of any number of LGBTQ plus identities, and their rights will need to be respected. And you as a union will need to fight for that as part of your protecting the rights of workers. So I don't think, I mean, you can say, well, the union, and obviously the union should be primarily focused on workplace issues because that's what a labor union is for. But that's why the concept of intersectionality exists. I mean, intersectionality isn't something that somebody just made up. It's a concept that describes a thing that actually happens. If you have a marginalized identity, if you are a queer person or a person of color or an immigrant or a person of a religion that is a minority religion where you live, or you have a disability or any other, factor of your life, of your person that subjects you to inequality or injustice, that's not only a social issue. If you are a member of a union where you work, that is a union issue as well, because you are a worker and your rights need to be respected and you need to be treated with respect in your workplace. So the union needs to be worried about that stuff. It's never going to be their entire mission, nor should it be. But yes, the union needs to be supportive of broader social issues because they intersect with labor issues, because they're part of people's lives and they're part of who people are. And people deserve to not be mistreated on the basis of those things. So no, I think it needs to primarily be workplace focused, but it needs to take social justice issues into account because because they exist and they affect people's lives. Siamak, who just realized he may be home, so should submit something. Very responsible, my friend. Greetings, Steve. I would say happy 4th weekend, but it seems there's precious little to celebrate this weekend. We're now in a place where every 4 years we can't get it wrong even once. That's a great way to put it, by the way. It sucks, but that's a great way to put it. Still wrapping my brain around this one, to be honest. But while I have legal limitations on my ability to contribute and volunteer due to my profession, once we know who the Democratic nominee will be, I'll be donating what I'm permitted and will be phone banking and door knocking, about all I can do other than stuff envelopes. But I'm doing it. Have to. I'm in PA. So are my 80-year-old folks in Virginia. What extra steps are you taking now to help us win in November, given how immensely higher, and they were existentially high already, the stakes have gotten? A reminder to strong blue state residents, you don't have to volunteer in your state. They can use you remotely, so don't think it's a waste. That's a very important point. I am going to do, I actually, thank you for the reminder and the kick in the pants to do this. I've seen one of my friend Greta Christina, who a lot of people who have also been active in the atheist and secular movement probably remember or find that name familiar. She does get out the vote postcards, where you register with an organization. I'll have to go to Greta's Facebook page and find out what the specific organization is that she that she works with. But basically, they send you a mailing list, and you write postcards to everybody. It's like a mail version of door knocking, a mail version of canvassing, basically, to remind them about the election and to remind them to get out there and vote for the Democratic candidate. In my case, is who I would be advocating for. And I'm probably going to do something like that. Maybe I'll wait until a little closer to the election to try and maximize the effect of it. But that's something that I feel like I can do without it putting too big of a demand on my time. And of course, if I can afford it, I'll donate to I'll donate some money to the Democratic National Committee and to the Biden campaign and to my more state and local races that are on the ballot this year. But I think that kind of thing is incredibly important. And yeah, the point at the end about if you want to volunteer, but you're in a strong blue state, yes, you can volunteer remotely. That's something, if anybody remembers, in 2022, that's something that Dana and I did. I know we talked about it in some videos, and we did virtual phone banking together. We would connect with each other over a Zoom call and kind of support each other as we made phone calls. And and it was in Georgia. Of course, Dana actually lives in Georgia, and I'm not from Georgia, but I was volunteering to try and flip Georgia and get Democrats elected there. And I think that was specifically getting the Democratic senators elected there, which worked, which was a success. So yeah, that kind of thing is very important. And if you are able to do that, if you have the time to do that, if you have the energy to do that, I would strongly encourage everybody to do that. Getting out the vote will be of utmost importance. History shows that when voter turnout is high, Democrats tend to win. And when voter turnout is low, Republicans tend to win. Republicans prosper when we do not participate in the process. That's why it's very important for us to participate in the electoral process. Because when that happens, Republicans tend to lose and Democrats tend to win. So it is incredibly important that we do that and that we do whatever we can in our own ways to encourage other people to do that. There's no sitting this one out, or there shouldn't be. And there's no excuse to. Isaiah Taylor. So, Steve, I was going to do my late seating podcast fanfic segment, but I changed my mind because I need to get something off my chest. Here you go. I don't understand the red-hot hatred toward the Palestinians. I have never seen anything so vile and horrifying in my life, and I'm only 32, all over an incident that happened 1,000 miles away. Also, why do we treat Israel the way that racist white men would treat white women by claiming that black men were coming to rape them? I can't believe that we are seeing the destruction of an entire people due in part to religion. This is why religion is a blight on our existence, and I'm glad that I'm an atheist. Yes, some atheists are garbage. Am I the only one who is deeply bothered by this? Anyway, wish me luck tomorrow at the costume contest for InfinityCon. Well, obviously, good luck tomorrow, and I hope your Guy Bluford costume wins. It should. It's amazing. You are certainly not the only one. There are lots of people who are deeply bothered and disgusted and outraged by what is happening, by what is actually happening to the Palestinians and has been happening to them for a very, very long time, but in its current stage has been happening since October of last year, and are also really upset and disgusted with the attempts to defend what the IDF is doing and what the Netanyahu government is doing, and to justify it, to apologize for it, to enable it and support it, as unfortunately our government here in the United States has done and continues to do. You're definitely not the only one. I mean, why is it like this? It's a constellation of factors, I think. It's very complicated. There's no one reason for it. There is a pre-existing sympathy for Israel because of what it represents to the Jewish people, because of the history of Jewish people enduring atrocities and genocide, and the Jewish people being the targets of the most infamous genocide ever committed. And, you know, that's completely reasonable. We should sympathize with the Jewish people as a result of that. We should be on the side of the Jewish people as a result of that. We should want to call out and strike against anti-Semitism wherever we find it. That is completely reasonable, and that is something that we should all do and should all be doing. But that sympathy toward the Jewish people and toward the homeland of the Jewish people, Israel, can and has been co-opted by people who believe that fighting anti-Semitism and supporting the Jewish people has to mean that you support the government of Israel no matter what it does. And that, to me, is a bridge too far. I think, you know, I've said many times in videos since October 7th, I am not an apologist for Hamas. I am not a fan of Hamas. I have no fondness for Hamas as an organization or for the things that they do. But even if you take for granted that Hamas is everything that Israel says it is, and I'm not saying it's not, but even if you just don't even explore that at all, you just say, yeah, okay, I'll believe the state of Israel. I'll believe Netanyahu. Everything he says about Hamas is true. Even if you just take that for granted, that does not justify what has been done to the Palestinian people. That does not justify what has been done to the Gazan people specifically. Nothing justifies it. Nothing justifies it. Not the hostages, not the threat of Hamas, Nothing. And that's assuming that we can take the Netanyahu government on its word in good faith and assume that they are working as diligently and as carefully to free the hostages as they say they are, which I don't think they are. So, I mean, it's a lot of it is the, and a lot of it is there are a lot of very powerful moneyed interests that use their resources to influence the political narrative and to encourage people, especially elected officials, to support Israel no matter what, and to propagate the narrative that Israel is always the good guy and whoever Israel is fighting is always the bad guy, and it's always that black and white. There's a lot of things contributing to it, but you are certainly not the only one who is upset by it, not by a long shot. Matthew Datcher, sorry to talk about politics, but this year's election cycle has felt like a complete disaster, not the least of which is last week's debate. How are you maintaining hope this year? Well, I've said some of it already as far as, it ain't over till it's over and that sort of thing. And also something I didn't mention before, which I kind of touched on with the this isn't going to be permanent thing. If worse does come to worse, that, the bad stuff is not going to last forever. I just, on the long scale, I am still optimistic. Martin Luther King said the moral arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. And I believe that. I mean, maybe it's naive to believe that, but I believe that. I believe it has to be bent. I believe it doesn't just happen naturally. It happens as a result of human action. But I think history has shown over the centuries that while we do have a tendency to commit atrocities and to abuse each other and to subjugate each other and to make war on each other, we have a very an upsettingly regular tendency to do that cyclically throughout our history. We also have a history of rising from the ashes, of building back in the aftermath of disaster, of improving ourselves, of improving our society, of protecting the rights of more and more people. And sometimes there are regressions and sometimes there are backlashes and backslides. I think we're in the middle of one of those now. But in the long term, things, generally speaking, on the long arc, tend to get better, tend to improve. And that gives me hope. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that we will all live to see things get as better as we would like to see them get. But I feel relatively assured that on the long term, things will continue to get better, even if they may get worse in the short term. And it's not very much comfort to those of us, because I mean, you live your life in the short term is the shitty part of it. But if you're looking for reasons to maintain hope and reasons to, continue fighting and not give up and not just completely tune out and pretend that things aren't happening, in the long term, things tend to get better. Russell, hey, Steve, big sigh, jumping right into this one. That debate, now with the complications of the Supreme Court rules that former presidents have broad immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts, is now a good time to panic? I mean, who are we kidding here? Neither of those men need to be the leader of the U.S., have access to our nuke codes, control over our military, or make decisions regarding policy. We need a third option, Steve, and I am sad to say I have not read up on Kennedy Jr., but what little I did read, I liked. What are your thoughts on all of this? I go into detail here. I am limited. It's why I back capping or highly taxing the rich and allowing for people to have a chance to become business owners, rise to the level of city council, all the way up to good presidential candidates, and have more than just the two freaking options, have a real democracy. That's the gist of it. Not sure how much more space I have. Again, thought. See you soon. RFK Jr. is a joke and a clown and not worth the time of day, much less anyone's vote. He's anti-science. He's anti-vax. He's a moron. He's a joke. He's a disgrace to his name. I don't think anybody, and he is not. And even if he were not all of those things, he is just not a viable candidate. He is not going to win. He does not have a realistic shot to win. It is a waste of time and a waste of your vote to support him. So don't, for the love of God, don't vote for RFK Jr. If you wanted to vote for RFK Jr., here's what you should do instead. You should go into the bathroom. You should pull out a couple of squares of toilet paper, get a Sharpie, write RFK Jr. on the toilet paper, wipe your ass with it, flush it down the toilet, because that will have done as much good for the world as voting for fucking RFK fucking Jr. Now then, on to your broader point. Yes, it would be nice to have more options in the presidential election, and for that matter, in local and state elections too. Most elections in this country come down to Republican versus Democrat, and it would be nice to have more options, to have more viable third parties, as they're usually called, or minor parties in the mix. But here's the thing to remember: between now and November, that's not going to happen. So in November, you have to vote for Joe Biden. That's it. That's the end of the conversation. And this November, you have to vote for Joe Biden. Now, if you feel drawn to helping to build up a third party, if you feel drawn to giving money to a third party, to volunteering for a third party, perhaps putting yourself up as a candidate for a third party, or maybe campaigning in your district or state to improve ballot access for third parties, because in a lot of places it's harder for a third party candidate to get on a ballot for an election than it is for a Democrat or a Republican. So, if you think that if you feel compelled to advocate and lobby for more equitable ballot access, which I think would be a great thing, by the way, or if you want to advocate for and push for the implementation of instant runoff voting, which again, I also think is a great idea and something that we should have nationwide that would encourage people to vote for more third-party candidates. I think that's great, and I think you should do that. But in November, it's the Democrats or nobody. I mean, that's just the way it is. You can say, well, we should have a third option. I shouldn't have to choose between Trump and Biden, so I'm going to vote for Jill Stein, or I'm going to vote for RFK Jr. You are accomplishing nothing. You're accomplishing nothing good. You're depriving Joe Biden of a vote and therefore making it easier for Donald Trump to win. So you're accomplishing something bad. You're certainly not accomplishing anything good. What you're doing is the same thing that the people who live in the safe blue states are doing when they say, well, I'm just not going to vote for the president because Biden's probably going to win anyway. You're keeping your hands clean. And to me, that's a cowardly thing to do in a situation like this. To me, if you say, well, I could vote for Joe Biden, I could contribute to the effort to make sure Donald Trump doesn't get elected, to make sure the Republicans don't get elected. I could, like if I was going to vote for one of the two, I would vote for Biden. But there's all these things about Biden I don't like. So I'm just not going to vote for him, or I'm going to vote for this third party candidate. That way my hands are clean. That's cowardly. That's what a coward does. You're choosing your conscience and your comfort and keeping your hands clean over doing the best thing that you can do in this situation for the country. And if you disagree with that, that's fine, but that's how I feel about it. And I'm not directing it specifically at you. I'm directing it at everybody who feels that way. I don't know about Joe Biden. I mean, there's all kinds of things that suck about Joe Biden. I'm not going to waste a second arguing with you about it. There's all kinds of things that fucking suck about Joe Biden. But it's him or Trump. So who are you going to vote for? Because if you're not voting for Biden, you're making it easier for Trump to win, even if you live in a safe blue state. So you can choose your own conscience. You can say the most important thing to me in this election, with the prospect of Donald Trump winning again, the most important thing to me is soothing my conscience and keeping my hands clean. You can do that, or you can do something fucking useful. Those are the options. Sorry to sugarcoat it. Dana, who definitely understands where Eveline was coming from. Sing it with me, Steve. Don't nobody bring me no bad news. I'm tired of working hard and feeling like like all it accomplishes is turning a major disaster into a minor one. With that in mind, how about a pleasant story? It's summer break. How about a summer vacation memory featuring wee small Steve? Maybe the first time you visited the National Air and Space Museum? Extra credit if you have photos to share, which you know goddamn well I don't. No photos to share, but I do remember the first time I visited the Air and Space Museum. As you know, Dana, and as a lot of people who are regular viewers of mine know, um, I have been a space head since I was a little kid, since I was wee small Steve. I've always loved astronauts and space travel and the solar system and the universe. And I mean, I watched Carl Sagan's Cosmos for the first time when I was like 5 years old, and I was immediately just completely in love with it. And I watched The Right Stuff when I was not that much older, and of course, and I loved watching the space shuttle launches and all of that. I've been an outer space nerd and a space travel nerd for my entire life. And the first time we went to the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., I was probably 8 or 9 years old. So in that ballpark, I'm not sure exactly, but in that ballpark. And it was during summer vacation. And it's amazing to be a child and to go into a place like that for the first time. And first, just the size of it. The building is enormous. And I'm talking about the main Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. Since the first time we went, they have opened sort of a satellite campus in Northern Virginia called the Udvar-Hazy Center that is basically a series of airplane hangars where they have much bigger vehicles and much bigger exhibits. But the main Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in DC is still it's an enormous building. And the interior space of it, just that by itself is awe-inspiring, especially for a little kid. And you go in there and you look up, and the Spirit of St. Louis, the actual airplane, is hanging from the ceiling. And the glamorous Glennis, the Bell X-1 that Chuck Yeager flew and broke the sound barrier with, the actual plane, is hanging from the ceiling. It's stunning the first time you see it. It's remarkable. I mean, it's just like, holy shit, that's the Spirit of St. Louis. That's the plane that Chuck Yeager flew in 1947 to break the sound barrier. That's it. That's the actual one. It's right there, hanging from the ceiling like a mobile over a child's crib. It's amazing. The thing I remember the most, though, the most specific experience I remember from the first time I went to the Air and Space Museum was, of course, I loved the Mercury astronauts, the Mercury 7, America's original astronauts. As I still love them now, they are still my heroes. And they had on display, it was John Glenn's space capsule. It was the Friendship 7, which John Glenn, piloted basically, to become the first American to orbit the Earth. And there it is, like on the floor, right in front of you. You can walk right up to it. And even as a child, even as an 8 or 9-year-old child, I was struck by how small it was. It's so small. I mean, you think of these, and it's a single occupant space capsule. Like you expect it to be smaller than like an Apollo 11 capsule, or certainly smaller than the space shuttle, which can accommodate a crew of like 6 or 7 people. The Mercury spacecraft were single occupant. It was one astronaut would climb in there, and it was a tight squeeze. But even knowing all of that, I was struck by how small it was. It's so small. And back then you could walk right up to it. It was just the display of the Mercury capsule was out in the middle of the floor. And it was one of the first things you see when you walk through the door. It was on the main floor, right inside the front entrance, right under where the Spirit of St. Louis and the glamorous Glennis are, right? And you could walk right up to it. And it was encased in plexiglass. So it was protected but you could walk right up to it and put your hand on it. And you put your hand on the plexiglass that was, sort of, that formed like a shell around it, but you could put your hand on it. And of course the hatch was off, so you could walk up to that side of the capsule and look inside through the plexiglass and see where John Glenn sat. And the thing I remember about it, other than all of that, is back then there were little gaps in the plexiglass where the pieces of the plexiglass didn't, because I mean the capsule is round and the plexiglass is fitted over top of it in sections to form like a shell, but there are gaps in certain spots between the panels of plexiglass, and you could stick your finger in there and you could touch the actual skin of the capsule. And you were not supposed to do that. You certainly weren't encouraged to do that. But I did it. I couldn't not do it. I was standing right next to John Glenn's space capsule. And I reached my little fingers through the plexiglass and I touched the skin of John Glenn's Mercury spacecraft of the Friendship 7. And the last time I went to the Air and Space Museum, which was several years ago, it was pre-COVID. But the last time I went to the Air and Space Museum, they had rearranged the exhibits and the Mercury capsule was still there. But now it was behind, it was like in a glass case. It was like in a glass box. So you could still walk up to it and you could still, stand and kind of look through the window and see into it, but you were kept at a distance from it. You couldn't touch it anymore. It was, So I'm sure I wasn't the only one to touch the capsule, but I got to do it. And I'm glad I did. And I can always say that when I was 8 or 9 years old, whatever, the first time I went to the Air and Space Museum, I got to put my fingertips on the skin of the spacecraft that carried John Glenn around the planet Earth in 1963. 1962, I think it was. It was 62 or 63. But anyway, that was my first trip to the Air and Space Museum. And the whole trip was great. The whole experience was fantastic. It's one of my favorite places in the world. But that moment where I got to touch the space capsule, the Mercury space capsule, was wonderful. So thank you for asking that question, even though you tauntingly said share pictures when you knew very well I didn't have any pictures, Dana. But no, it's a wonderful memory that I have and that I'm glad I got the opportunity to share. That's it for the patron questions. I'm going to turn to the live chat here in a minute, but first, regular viewers know what time it is. It is time for me to debut a brand new Stuffy and Friends short. And this Stuffy and Friends short will go live on my YouTube channel tomorrow as a standalone YouTube short. But because you are watching this live stream right now, you get to see it first. So here we go. Please enjoy this brand new Stuffy and Friends short. The producer says, well, that's a hell of an act. What do they call it? And the agent says, the Aristocrats. And why is that funny? Well, it's definitely not funny if I explain it to you. Stuffy, explain it to him.
The punchline juxtaposes the over-the-top vulgarity of the act being described with the sophistication suggested by the name.
I see. And why is that funny?
Well, the punchline itself isn't really the point. The Aristocrats is more about the setup. The telling of the joke goes on and keeps getting filthier and more transgressive and builds up to a really corny payoff. The punchline is supposed to be a letdown.
How interesting. And why is that funny? What the hell, man? You think you can tell a better joke? I'm looking at one right now. Ha! Why is that funny? Explain it to him, Stuffy.
He's saying you are a joke.
I get it. I like it. Anyway, I like the ones where I'm the fool. It's reliably funny. For all aspiring comedians, Not that I'm a comedian, but all aspiring comedians take note. It's reliably funny when you make yourself the fool, make yourself the butt of the joke. Let us turn now to the live chats and see what you all are talking about. Michael Headline, I'm going to get space cancer on my finger. No, totally worth it. Let me see here. Stephen Legresley says, quick rewrite for Picard season 2. Make it a story where Picard has to go back to his childhood and fix the time problem there, since the season is built around his trauma. Have the future be a Borg future and actually show us what that would look like, and have the change be Picard saving his mom, and have Q help him understand that he never could have fixed it, and make him see that he has to let the past happen the way it had to. Most of the rest could still happen because it involves the Borg. I mean, that at least has the virtue of there is a specific thing that needs to be fixed, right? As opposed to the way season 2 actually happened, where it was just like, I guess maybe they have to make sure the lady goes to space. Maybe. Hi, Jason. Jason's here. Hi, Jason. Stephen G. Clenard with a member message. I hope you don't plan on visiting the Golden State anytime soon, since that weak sauce Lord Baltimore's coat of arms, makes jerking off gesture, will provide zero protection from a grizzly mauling. Just give me a second. I'm just going to ban Stephen from the chat. I'm just saying, you're taking your life in your hands when you shit talk the Maryland state flag. Just look, I like you, okay? I like you. And I like, the effort that you put into your questions. Very funny. Like, you're a really funny dude. I like you a lot. I'm not going to say a word to the Maryland flag about this. But if she finds out, there's nothing I can do to protect you. So just bear that in mind. 255 AD says, have you seen Dark Star? I deliberately tried to think of a film that's obscure, but one a film buff like you may have heard of. I don't think I have seen Dark Star. Yeah, 255 AD, the joke in your question was fantastic. It was perfectly done. It was perfectly done. Oh, Gedrin, yeah, I didn't think about that, but yeah, the moment in Star Trek First Contact where Picard puts his hand on the Phoenix. I mean, I didn't like reduce me to tears or anything. It didn't hit me that hard, but I definitely know how he feels and, understand why he felt the need to touch it. Absolutely. Super chat from Doc Azrael. Putin and Kim hanging out. Saudi may have orchestrated 9/11. What timeline is this? But yeah, you think CM Punk is going to pull a Lesnar and just take the briefcase while Drew watches? So Money in the Bank is this weekend for all you wrestling fans. My prediction is that Drew is going to win the match and win the briefcase and cash it in on whoever is the world champion at the end of the night. And then Punk will screw him out of it again. And that will lead into their SummerSlam match. I don't know. I mean, I don't know for a fact that they're going to wrestle at SummerSlam, but I assume if Punk is cleared and ready to go, I mean, maybe he won't be, maybe Punk won't be ready yet. But if Punk is able to be medically cleared in time for SummerSlam, my assumption is that McIntyre versus Punk, at least their first match, will be at SummerSlam. And I can't think of a better way to kick off the final push toward that than to have Drew think he's gotten rid of Punk, right? He beat his ass. He bloodied him. He sent him home in an ambulance, right? And then Drew comes in to Money in the Bank. He wins that ladder match. He wins that briefcase. And then just like he said he would, he comes marching down after the world title match. Whoever has won, the exhausted champion, and he goes to cash in that briefcase, and he cashes it in, and the match for the world title begins officially. They ring the bell. Drew has cashed in the case, and then Punk runs in and fucks him. And that is, oh shit. Like, what more can Punk do? He screwed him out of the world title 3 times now. That's what I think. That if I had to guess, that's what I think is going to happen. But we'll see. We'll see tomorrow, I suppose. And super chat from Stephen G. Clenard. Also, according to the California state constitution, monarch has full immunity for any flag-related actions. Also, he can poop anywhere he pleases, but that's not relevant here. Well, good to know. It's important to know these things if I ever do visit California. I want to know like what the local laws and customs are, you know? Oh, Jason specifically said hi to Dana and the folks, not to me. Oh, Steve Schmaling, this election I'm writing in Bob Johnson. Put your faith in blast hard cheese. Yes, Gristle McThornbody for president. What was one of the other ones? There's so many of those great nicknames. Chunk butt steak. Oh, Space Mutiny, how I love thee. Gedrin, why she's sitting upside down on my head because like I explained that in the video I released on Monday. So let's just not make too big of a deal out of it, okay? John Collins says 3 points. 1, why does Biden sound so weird one night and the next day so powerful at the gates of hell? 2, why do they think Kamala would be better? She ran badly. 3, Project 25, a problem behind Trump. Well, first of all, yes, Project 2025 is a big problem, especially if Trump gets elected. Why do they think Kamala would be better if she ran bad? Well, she'd be better against Trump, I think, is the assumption, because she's younger and more vigorous and more energetic, and she would be able to push back against Trump more forcefully than Biden, certainly than Biden did at that debate. And as for number 1, why does Biden sound so weird one night and the next day so powerful? A lot of it probably has to do with how much rest he's gotten and the time of day, you know, and whether or not, and his general health. I mean, if he was tired because it was relatively late in the day and he was diminished by having a cold and probably having taken cold medicine and being groggy because of that, and plus he's like 81 years old, it's not an excuse, and it doesn't make the debate any more of a terrible performance, but that I think that would account for why he was so much worse then than he is at a typical appearance. Matt Tarwater says, thanks for your vids and streams, and I appreciate your perspective. Keep your head round. Well, thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate that. Knit and Crochet Tiger says, the Maryland flag looks like the pattern was cut from the butt panel of a palace guard. Louisiana's flag has the sick offspring of a chicken and a turkey. I think the Louisiana flag comment is acceptable, but the Maryland flag slander, I'm telling you, you guys are, you're fucking around. And I hope you, for your sakes, I hope you never find out. Hey, Matthew. Isaiah Taylor says, anti-Semitism is wrong, but I'm starting to have trust issues with Jewish people over the lack of voices calling out this crisis. There are plenty of Jewish people calling it out. I will say that. There are plenty of Jewish people who are speaking out against what the state of Israel is doing in Gaza. So please don't think that it is a universally held opinion among Jewish people that, you know, Israel is in the right and what's happening in Gaza is fine. It's definitely not the case from what I can see. Doc Asriel with a super chat. Thank you very much. Says, oh yeah, forgot my real question. Are you ready to support RFK and welcome our new parasite overlords? Like Lieutenant Commander Remick in The Conspiracy. I mean, that's apparently, I think I made this joke a couple months ago when that story first came out, when the bit about RFK had a worm in his brain that ate some of his brain and died. And then the real question is did the brain worm die because RFK Jr.'s brain poisoned it? Or did the brain worm die because it starved to death? I mean, we need to know these things. 255 AD says, are the first 2 Mercury missions really major accomplishments? I mean, they didn't even enter orbit. The astronauts only entered space by our arbitrary 100-kilometer mark. Well, they're major accomplishments in the sense that they were basically proofs of concept for the American space program. I mean, judged against the accomplishments of the Soviet space program at that time, they're not very impressive because, yeah, Gagarin orbited the Earth more times than Glenn did. The first time Gagarin, I mean, in the first one, like, so just in terms of how high they went and how many orbits they got, no, the Shepard and Grissom flights are not terribly impressive, but they're important because they demonstrated the soundness and the reliability of the NASA, of the Mercury program, that you could send astronauts into space in those spacecraft on those rockets and have them safely return to Earth. That was very important. And I mean, yeah, if you look at it that way, if you look at it in terms of comparing it with what the Soviets were doing at that time, I mean, even Glenn's space flight wasn't that big of a deal because the Soviets had already sent up multiple astronauts that had orbited the Earth. So Glenn being the first American to orbit the Earth was a big deal to us Americans. But in terms of like the history of space flight and charting human accomplishment, not that big of a deal. But again, it's about how it advances and validates the specific space program that it was a part of. Kirak says, why is it cowardly to know your own consciousness and realize that Biden and Trump, one belongs in jail and the other belongs in a nursing home? It's not knowing your own consciousness that's cowardly. It's choosing to serve your own conscience at the expense of the rest of the country. You might say that Biden belongs in a nursing home and Trump belongs in prison. Okay, which one should be president? Because it's one of those two guys. Like everything else is semantics. Everything else is just mental masturbation. It's going to be Biden or it's going to be Trump. You can say, well, they both belong in it. Neither one of them should be president. Okay, maybe you're right, but one of them's going to be. So who's it going to be? Like, that's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. Lady Merlin says RFK is so toxic that the brainworm got lead poisoning from eating his brains. Thank you for the super chat. Yes, exactly. Oh, Joe McClory, do I have a second favorite state flag? Is it North Carolina that has a really nice state flag? North Carolina? No, it's not a state flag, but the city flag of Chicago is fantastic. I love the city flag of Chicago. And that's not just because I'm a CM Punk fan, just on its own merits, on its own aesthetic merits. The Chicago flag is fantastic. And the Washington, D.C. flag is really good as well, which is similar to the Chicago flag in terms of the design with the stripes and the stars in the middle. Those are both really nice flags. So, I mean, the D.C. flag could be a state flag, D.C. statehood, right? So if DC ever becomes a state, maybe the DC flag will be my second favorite flag. Duncan Morris says, finally caught up with the Ensign's log. Brilliant as always. Thanks for answering my questions on your live. And hello to Dana and Jason. You three are awesome. Thank you very much, Duncan. We appreciate that. Dark Matter. When did you start wrestling and who is your all-time favorite? Mine is Bret Hart. I assume you mean when did I start watching wrestling? My all-time favorite is Ricky Steamboat. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat is my all-time favorite wrestler. Bret is way up there. I love Bret. Like, Bret is way, way up there for me. But my all-time favorite is Ricky. God, I love Ricky Steamboat. One of the best selling baby faces, maybe the best selling baby face I've ever seen. Like, I love the way Ricky Steamboat, when his opponent was going to vertical suplex him, and they're set for it, and Ricky, has his arm around the guy's shoulder, and the guy has his arm around Ricky's head, and he's grabbing him by the tights. And Ricky would always do this little thing where he would just relax, so it looks like he's slumping against the other guy, like he's just completely out of it, like he has no energy left, like he's just done. He would slump against the other guy so that it looked like the guy suplexing him was doing all the work and that Ricky was just beat. It's just a little detail like that to really sell the realism and draw you more into the story of the match. Ricky was just the best. Ricky Steamboat. My God, what a wrestler. Yeah, Doc Azrael, Steamboat versus Flair was a reliable, great match. Steamboat versus Savage at WrestleMania 3, still a very popular and very valid choice for best match ever, if it's not one of the Steamboat Flair matches. Um, Maybe my favorite tag team match ever. Ricky Steamboat and Dustin Rhodes versus Arn Anderson and Larry Zbyszko from Clash of the Champions in November 1991. I mean, just an amazing match. In fact, I might watch that tonight because every time I think about it, I want to watch it. I love that goddamn match so much. So many great Ricky matches. Matt Tarwater with a super chat. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Let me see. Insert name here says, do you think the fixation on people in a democratic election is sensible by the electorate? Shouldn't such an election be much more about actual policy and ideas? Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. But we here we are. I mean, it should be about the people in terms of their trustworthiness, that kind of thing, their competence, their ability, their integrity. But it should have less to do with, their personality or their likability or would you have a beer with them or whatever. Like in a perfect world, you would care less about that stuff and more about stuff that would be directly relevant to the job you're electing them to. Yeah. Another super chat from Stephen Clenard. Thank you again, my friend. Does it seem odd to you that the media isn't seriously asking whether the GOP should replace its candidate because he's a fucking felon? Yes, it does. It does seem odd. Like if the Democrats are supposed to be scrambling to get somebody to replace their guy on the ticket, their guy who just so happens to currently be the president because he had a shitty debate. Like if that's a valid reason to be, setting our hair on fire and going, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are the Democrats going to do? How is Trump being a convicted felon not a far more urgent example? Yeah. And I think it's very telling that that is the case. Kirok says, another super chat, thank you very much, says, Kirk once said, I want that third alternative. Yeah, but there isn't the third alternative is what I'm trying to say. There is no third alternative. You can wish in one hand and shit in the other. There is no third alternative. I mean, you can vote for other people, but it's a waste of time. It's illusory. Nobody other than Trump or Biden is going to win. That's my fucking point. You can vote for whoever you want. If you really want to vote for RFK Jr., go ahead. It's going to mean nothing. You will have accomplished nothing. You will have wasted your vote. You will have done no good for anyone except apparently soothing your conscience. And not just directly at you personally, but anybody who's thinking that way. Well, there should be a third option. Okay, there should be, but there's not. Not this time. There should be, but there's not. And Michael Adeline, Kirk is a character in a fictional story. Yes, indeed. BB Steamboat versus the Ring Bell. Yes. And also Steamboat getting DDT'd by Jake on the floor. Remember that? Remember when if you got DDT'd on the floor, you were just gone for like months because the crowd assumed, oh shit, he's probably dead. Like he got dropped on his face by another wrestler on the floor, on the concrete floor of the arena. He's probably just dead, right? And now that happens during a match, and 10 seconds later, the guy's up and back in the ring and running the ropes. But back then, Ricky got that DDT on the floor, and it was like, oh, shit. He's fucked up. He might never wrestle again. He's lucky to be alive. Oh, boy. Doc Asriel with a super chat. Thank you all very much for being so generous with the super chats tonight, by the way. I really appreciate it. Doc says, I live in a sober living house and I have empathy for Biden's performance at the debate. I've had to confront people, and once the gaslighting gets turned up to 1,000, I get stun locked. Totally get it. Oh, so do I. I mean, it was hard to watch. Like, that debate was really hard to watch. But I mean, yeah, it's not like I didn't know what was going on, you know. And yeah, I mean, Trump's behavior was reprehensible, you know. Absolutely. Like, if you care about the truth, if you care about what the truth is, then I mean, Trump's performance at that debate was a million times worse than Biden's. Biden's was a performance issue. Trump's was a character issue. He was just lying continuously, flagrantly, fearlessly, nonstop from start to finish. Oh, okay, Matt Tarwater. For you meant to post this in the super chat. Who do you vote for the sake of the country? Kirk, Cisco, Picard, or Janeway? I mean, given the enemies of democracy that we are facing at the present moment, I think the best man for the job is Cisco. Yeah, Stephen LeGresley, the best wrestling match of all time, The Undertaker versus Mankind in the first Boiler Room Brawl. I do not agree, but I respect your opinion. Sorry, 255D. I saw you ask this earlier, but I got sidetracked with other questions. How do you feel about the Gemini program? It's my favorite. Oh, yeah, going back to that idea of one of the important parts of the space program, especially in the pre-Apollo space programs, was proof of concept, was figuring out how to do things that they would need to do to successfully land on the moon, and then proving that they could do it. And that's all that the Gemini program was. I mean, the Gemini was about long duration space flight, staying in space for days and days and days, like they would have to for a trip to the moon and back, and also rendezvous and docking, and figuring out, like, okay, we need to be able to do precision flying in space with these spacecraft so we can dock with the lunar module, and then set sail for the moon. And those were the main objectives of Gemini. And of course, the spacewalk, the first EVA by an American astronaut, Ed White doing the first spacewalk. Like, who doesn't love that? That's one of the great moments in the history of human exploration, or at least in the history of American exploration, because the Russians had done that first as well. But yeah, the Ed White spacewalk was wonderful, and that was Project Gemini. 255 AD joke. I sometimes tell myself I'm a libertarian socialist. Do I have to run into a government building with an AK-47? That's pretty good. I like that. Oh, Air One Fire. That's cool that watching some of my Star Trek stuff got you to go back to TOS. That's great. I'm glad you like it. I'm a big TOS fan as well. I love some classic Star Trek. Doc Asriel, Cisco Garrick, 2024. It's a compromise ticket, It's a union ticket. Joe McClory, I agree. The moderators were terrible. I mean, here's the thing: the debate was badly designed, and I think it was badly designed because they knew that if they didn't do it the way they did it, Trump would say no, and then they wouldn't have a TV show. And they wanted to have a TV show with high ratings that would generate money for the network, which is understandable, but maybe not at the cost of democracy. Can we not do that at the cost of democracy, please? But yeah, I mean, the moderators were doing what they had been told and were hired to do. it was made clear before the show started that they were not going to be challenging statements made by the candidates. They were not going to be fact checking things. And they didn't. And they should have. I agree. The debate should have been designed to allow for real-time fact checking, especially when the lies that Trump was telling are things that he's already said a million times. You know, like you could just have a list, like Jake Tapper and Dana Bash could have had a list of the lies that Trump tells at all of his rallies and just have it right there at their fingertips. They wouldn't have had to Google anything. They wouldn't have had to do any research. Just, oh, he's talking. Oh, he's saying the shit that he always says about when you ask him about climate change, he's talking about fucking clean water because he doesn't know what climate change is, right? Like you can see that coming. You can anticipate that. As soon as you ask him the question, you know that's what he's going to say. But that's not the job they were told to do. You know, it's not an excuse, but they did exactly the job they were hired to do, or not hired, I guess, but, you know, assigned. Nishikin Taki. I got to sit in the Gemini capsule as a kid. As an adult, I'm too big. Would have been to have been an astronaut. And that's so cool. You got to sit in a Gemini capsule. Oh, I envy you. Yeah, Geek, that's a really good point. Silencing the mics of Trump made him look more disciplined in the debate. Yeah. I mean, I get the idea. The idea was to try to keep order, but that way you didn't see Trump trying to run off and dominate things and break the rules. They just cut him off. Well, Kirak, if that's how you feel, if you say it comes down to Trump versus Biden and you say hello World War III, then you should vote for RFK Jr. and help Trump get elected, and that'll be the quickest way to get to World War III. So good luck with that. Good luck with that. You don't want to vote for Trump, that's fine. So vote for a third party and indirectly help Trump get elected, and that'll hasten World War III, and then you can have the satisfaction of having been right. Michael Adeline, giving up democracy in favor of capitalism in the U.S.? I'm shocked. This is my shocked face. Yeah, I know, right? Who ever heard of such a thing? Has this been happening? Since when has this been happening? John Stewart says, why does Janeway get more hate for killing Tuvix than Odo gets for wiping 8,000 people from existence? I mean, Janeway, and then the question continues, I suppose. Someone in the chat says John Stewart says, Geek says to John Stewart, people like Odo more than Janeway. I mean, that's a big part of it. But Odo, even though Odo seemed to have some moral awareness of what he had done, like in that episode where he acts to erase those 8,000 people from ever existing in order to save Kira. He does it because he loves Kira, and that doesn't make it right, and that doesn't make it, it doesn't morally absolve him of anything, but at least the character seems to have some awareness of the gravity of what he's doing. And then the earlier version of Odo, like our Odo, and also Kira, when they're dealing with it in the aftermath at the end of the episode, they are also grappling with the morality of what has been done. And when Janeway killed Tuvix, there was none of that. Janeway killed Tuvix and everybody was like, well, that was a bummer. Anyway, back to work. Like there was no attempt for any of the characters to engage with the moral consequences or the gravity of what had been done, of what Janeway had done. It was just completely blown off. Like, well, she did what she had to do, and that was it. And that, I think, for a lot of people, makes that act on Janeway's part a lot more difficult to swallow than what future Odo does in that Deep Space Nine episode. 25580. I mean, should Biden's team have refused to take part? It's tough. I don't know. I mean, before the debate happened, and before the debate was such a disaster for Biden, Biden's team wanted it and was looking forward to it, and they probably agreed to whatever terms were acceptable from Trump's team because they just wanted the debate to happen because they assumed Biden would have a strong showing and would wipe the floor with Trump. Of course, that didn't happen. And one of the reasons it didn't happen was because there was no fact checking and Trump was allowed to just freely lie without being challenged or contradicted or corrected. In hindsight, obviously, Biden's side should have said, we want fact checking during the debate. And if Trump refuses, then we're just not going to do it. And we're going to tell everybody that's why. That's what they should have done. If they haven't already set the rules for the second debate, that's what they should do that time. They should say, hey, in light of what happened last time, we want on air, real time fact checking from the moderators. If one of us, probably Trump, but if one of us says something that is patently false, we want the moderators to stop the debate and to call us out and to correct the record and point out that we have said something that was not true, right? And if that is not acceptable to Mr. Trump, then we're just not going to have the debate. They should do that. And when Trump says no way, then the Biden campaign should run on that, should make that an issue and should say, hey, we wanted to have a second debate after Trump, made Joe look like such a stuttering old fool last time. You'd think he'd be eager to come back and do it again, but he refused to meet our terms for the second debate. What was our terms? What did he refuse to agree to? What was Donald Trump so afraid of that he wouldn't even show up for a second debate? He was afraid of the truth. He was afraid of the American people being told the truth in contrast to his lies during the second debate. That's why he refused to debate. They should do something like that. I don't know if they can at this point. I don't know if the rules for the second debate have already been agreed upon. I don't know. And I don't know if they would anyway, but that's certainly in light of that first debate, that's something they should absolutely do. Oh, Doc Azrael says, if there's another Kelvin timeline movie, what plot would you like to see? I honestly have no idea. I would like it to be something completely original. I would like it to be something more akin to what they did with Star Trek Beyond, where it's just an original story. It's not a rebooting or a retelling or a reinterpretation of like a classic Star Trek episode or anything like that. It's just a new story with that crew. I mean, Chris Pine has given interviews recently where he said if they do a fourth one, he would like to explore his version of Kirk getting older, because now Chris Pine is just about the same age that William Shatner was when they were preparing to do the first Star Trek movie in the late 70s. So his Captain Kirk has kind of caught up to where the original Captain Kirk was. Like, he's no longer the young version of Kirk. He's just another version of Kirk. So it might be interesting to tell a story that not necessarily takes Kirk's age into account in the same way that Star Trek II did, where it becomes like a central thematic issue in the story, but just acknowledges it, maybe put Kirk in more of a turning point of his career, or, maybe instead of having Kirk get promoted to leave the Enterprise and then regret it, kind of build on what happened at the end of Star Trek Beyond, where he recommits himself to being captain of the Enterprise, and then something happens where he's forced to question that decision, where, maybe he starts to think, actually, maybe I am getting older. Maybe I am physically losing a step. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this anymore. Maybe actually I should think about getting, accepting promotion or getting another job or something. I mean, I'm just throwing stuff out there. I have no idea, but I would want it to be original. I want it to be something that I couldn't just say, oh, I hope they do the Kelvin timeline version of Errand of Mercy. Like, no, I want it to be something completely original. Dana says, since everyone knew that Trump was just going to go to his fabricated talking points, why didn't Biden's team prepare him to do the fact checking? Well, I think they did to a certain extent, but I think they also probably prepared Biden with so many facts and figures that it kind of bottlenecked. And I do think, I mean, they should have prepared Biden to do that, but it wouldn't have worked regardless because of Biden's poor performance. I mean, he was struggling to communicate during that debate. He was struggling to make himself heard. So even if Biden was prepared to rebut all of Trump's usual lies, like his just verbally and physically, he just wasn't able to assert himself and to do that. He kind of did it every now and then. You know, he pushed back a little and he contradicted some of Trump's lies, but not nearly clearly enough or forcefully enough, you know? So, yeah. But I mean, I agree. That's a good idea. Biden should be prepared to rebut Trump's lies. Oh, Kirok, yes, I'm going to get to your super chat. Sorry. Kirok says, team Janeway kills Tuvix, then wipes their hands of it, never mention it again. Tuvix who? Yeah, and as someone else pointed out, that's, you know, it's one of the possible perils of series TV or of episodic TV. It doesn't have to be. Like, you can do episodic TV where the episodes are self-contained, standalone episodes, but still acknowledge the events of past episodes in your series, especially past episodes that should have had a meaningful effect on the development of your characters. I mean, Deep Space Nine did it. You know, Deep Space Nine did it all the time. That's one of the things that makes Deep Space Nine such a great show, is that it is still mostly an episodic format. Most Deep Space Nine episodes are standalone episodes with their own beginning, middle, and end, but the characterization sticks. You know, if something important happens to, you know, Cisco or Kira or Nog or Rom, who weren't even regulars, who were recurring characters, but their characters developed over time as a result of what happened to them in the individual episodes. It's just Voyager didn't do that nearly as much, unfortunately. And if it had done that kind of thing more often, to the Tuvix episode, you would think would be an example of something that should have stuck, should have resonated in future episodes. And it just didn't, you know? Stephen G. Clenard, the Kelvin timeline version of The Way to Eden, please, now. I mean, maybe as a goof, you know? Yeah, 25580, I saw your explanation of your joke, but I missed it. I'm sorry, I didn't read it out. S.A. Ross with a super chat. Hi, Steve. Just binged seasons 1 and 2 of Prodigy and absolutely loved them. It's the first new Trek show I've watched, and I am so excited for more. Oh, that's awesome that Prodigy was the first new Trek show you've watched and that you liked it so much. I'll tell you, I mean, I know opinions vary, and you know, the thing, you know, my takes on it are certainly not universal, but for me, I mean, my favorite of the new stuff is Strange New Worlds, and right behind it is Prodigy. I think those 2 seasons of Prodigy that we now have are among the best stuff that has been made for this current production era of Star Trek. It's just outstanding. Really impressive. So I'm glad you watched it and I'm glad you liked it. Now I am going to start wrapping up the show. It's after 8 o'clock here. We've been going for over 2 hours. So if you have any final comments or questions in the live chat, go ahead and throw them in there, and I'll turn back to the chat real quick before I wrap things up. But if you enjoy this stuff I do on YouTube and you would like to support me and support this channel and enable me to continue doing it, one of the best ways you can do that is by becoming a Patreon patron, by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives and making a monthly pledge at whatever amount you think is appropriate and you can afford. And another way of doing that, if you don't want to go to Patreon, is just click the join button right here on the YouTube channel, right below this video. Click the join button and you can become a channel member directly through YouTube for one of the available dollar amounts. Helps me out tremendously, allows me to continue doing this. Oh, hey, Pondering Politics is here. Hey, Josiah, thank you very much for the super chat, my friend. I will get back to that in a second. I was very happy to be a guest on Pondering Politics this week. We recorded it last week, but it went up this week. But anyway, patreon.com/Steve Shives, become a channel member for any level of support, whether it's as a patron or a member, $1 a month on up to whatever you think I'm worth. You can submit questions ahead of time for these Ask Away live streams. That's one of the perks that everybody who is a patron or a member unlocks for themselves. The questions that I answer at the beginning of every Ask Away live stream are ones that are submitted ahead of time by my patrons and members. So if that's something you're interested in, patreon.com/Steve Shives, or click the join button. Also, don't forget, in addition to the YouTube stuff, I am a regular on 2 awesome podcasts that are part of the Lemmy Listen family of podcasts. The first is the Late Seating podcast that I am on alongside the brilliant Jason Harding, who is now in the live chat demanding money for the compliment he just gave me. I'm gonna pay you with a paper check, and I will mail it to you whenever I feel like it. But Jason and I are both on the Late Seating podcast, where we take a look at classic films and give them a fresh look and see if they deserve whatever reputation they have, be it good or bad. And our most recent episode was our review of, I know it's a favorite of both of mine and Jason's, the great 1980s sci-fi film Enemy Mine. So if you want to hear our thoughts on Enemy Mine, listen to the new Late Seating. And also, in addition to Late Seating, myself and Jason and Dana, who is also with us in the chat, or at least was, are all 3 on the Ensign's Log podcast, which is a Star Trek improv comedy podcast where the 3 of us play characters who exist in the Star Trek universe. And currently, we just started our 7th season. We are all 3 now living on Deep Space Nine, and our lives and our stories are happening in the foreground of the show, while Deep Space Nine stuff from the actual Deep Space Nine show is kind of happening in the background and is occasionally referenced. If you like Star Trek, if you like funny Star Trek stuff and you haven't listened to the Ensign's Log, I highly recommend that you give it a listen. It's been very nice to see a lot of people in the chat tonight talk about the Ensign's Log and mention listening to it. We love it. I'm very happy to be a part of it. I'm really proud of it and proud of the work we all do. And Jason does most of the work. Me and Dana just sit in front of microphones and talk. And Jason actually creates the show and is the creative force behind it. So it's really his show. But I am thrilled and grateful as always to be a part of it. So check out those shows and all of the great Let Me Listen podcasts, soundcloud.com/Lemmy-listen. And the links are also in the chat to the Ensign's Log and Late Seating. And also don't forget charitylinks.page, which is maintained by our friend Some Random Geek, that includes some links to help out friends of ours who are in some financial dire straits and could use some support. And also Geek shared some specific links to friends of ours who need help earlier in the live chat. So please scroll up and find those and make use of those if you would like to help out somebody who needs some help. And I believe that's it. So let me turn back to the live chat and see what I have missed. First of all, Pondering Politics said, can't wait for your Supreme Court immunity vid. Maybe if conservative justices said the quiet parts out loud. There is going to have to be a Republican say the quiet parts loud video making some reference to it. I just did one about the courts, so I don't want to do another one specifically about the courts so soon, but maybe if they said the quiet parts loud about presidential immunity or something like that, but I would like to do another one of those at some point in the near future that touches on that, because yeah. Kara says, before you go, really enjoy these chats and appreciate. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you too. I'm glad you're here. And another super chat from Kirok. Thank you very much for the super chats this time, my friend. Says, we disagree on some things, but for the most part, I love what you do. I don't think we are too far apart that much of politics. I could be wrong. You are amazing. And sorry, I went harsh on the debate. You're fine, man. I appreciate the super chat. I appreciate the apology, but it's not necessary. I'm not mad at you. We're good. It's all good. But I appreciate the sentiment, and I'm glad you're here too. Hand of Omega says, best worst Mirror Universe eps. Best is the original one, Mirror Mirror from TOS. Second place is probably the first Deep Space Nine one, Crossover. And worst is all the other ones in a tie. Let me see. Oh, Gordy Anson. Hey, Steve. Greetings from Maryland. A fellow Marylander. Welcome. 255 AD says, question, what do you think of the Gemini gravity experiment? It's my favorite of my favorite NASA program. You know, I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that. The Gemini gravity experiment. I don't know if I'm familiar with that. You may have opened my eyes to something new. I'll have to look that up. And yeah, Geek as well. Geek and I disagree on a lot about politics, but he's a good dude, a good person. I don't want to pigeonhole Geek as a dude. I know that Geek is gender fluid, but a good person. And yeah, we disagree on a lot, but we agree on a lot too. And I'm happy to consider us friends and allies. All right, Kara's going to bed. I think it's time to wrap this baby up. Thank you all so much for being with me once again. Thank you for all the awesome questions. Thank you for the super chats. And thanks, of course, to all of you who have been patrons and members for supporting the channel. I appreciate all of you. I couldn't do any of this without you. Thank you for watching. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. Those of you who are fellow wrestling fans who are planning on watching Money in the Bank and Heat Wave, the NXT show on Sunday, if you're planning on watching either or both of those, I hope you enjoy them. I hope I enjoy them because I'm going to watch them. And 255, I thought maybe it was something like that. They tried to do gravity by like centrifugal. That's really cool. I'm going to have to look that up and see and read something about that. I wasn't aware that they actually did that. That's really cool. And thank you for telling me about that because I didn't know about it. Anyway, Steve Schmeling says, Big McLarge, huge, and roll fizzle beef. Yes, indeed. For president, 2024, or maybe 2028. Because again, it's Biden or Trump this time. But anyway, thanks everybody for watching. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. And I will see you around. Take care.